Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adoptions from the Heart TV. I'm your host, Amanda Aliberti. Today, I'd like to welcome Michelle, who adopted her daughter through our agency. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi.
So, Michelle, talk to us about when you first decided to turn to adoption and what brought you specifically to Adoptions from the Heart.
So at some point, I realized I still wanted a child and I wasn't married, and it wasn't really safe for me to get pregnant. So I decided adoption's probably the best way to go for that. And I wasn't going to marry just to have a child. So I decided to do it on my own. And it was scary. And I was like, you know what? I'm at that age where I have to make a decision. So I don't really want to get much older while I'm trying to make that decision. So I would just search out adoption agencies. And I went to introductory meetings for, I think, 3 different ones. And then when I did the one for Adoptions from the Heart, it really just spoke to exactly what I was looking for, that I didn't want to be the one choosing a baby like, I'm purchasing something. I wanted it to be that the birth parents chose me to take care of their child. And it just really sunk in that that's really what I wanted. And I wanted it to be on them to choose me, and not that I was just choosing something.
Yeah. Michelle, I'm curious your perspective because we have a lot of single women and single men who join our program. And there can sometimes be a stigma against singles building their family in general, whether it's biologically or through adoption. What advice would you give to folks who, similar to what you're saying, it's like, I'm single, I know I want to be a parent. Am I supposed to wait? Do I need a partner? Like, what advice would you give of kind of jumping off that cliff and moving forward with decision making?
So I think my biggest thing was knowing who my true friends were and who I was willing to open up to, especially because we needed letters of recommendation. But the other part was I didn't tell my family. I had a feeling they were going to be very judgmental, which surprisingly they were not in the end for the most part. But a lot of them, I think, still question it because I don't live near them. I live far away from family. I'm doing this completely on my own. And at the same time, my parents absolutely loved the idea when I finally did tell them. And that was the part that I thought was going to be the hardest. And it actually was the easiest, which was surprising. But I grew up in a small town in Kansas where everybody was married and had their own children. And so it was kind of, I was afraid of the stigma like you're talking about, but it wasn't as bad as I expected in the end.
That's great. And similarly to what we hear from other folks, it's like knowing who your people are and recognizing that it does take a village to raise a child. And it doesn't just mean, it has to be the parents, as other people around.
Right.
Happy that you had a similar, way, and that your parents came around to what you needed of them in terms of
Yeah.
support and love.
They were so excited. It was funny. Like, they would have been just as excited if I told them I was pregnant.
Mm,
It was kind of interesting. And initially, I don't think it really clicked with them. And they were just like, okay. And I didn't really hear much, and they didn't really ask a whole lot. And I found out the reason was because they knew so many people had chosen adoption and then backed out without actually adopting. And so they didn't think it was actually going to happen because of their experience with other people. And that
interesting.
was the interesting part, is that I didn't know that part of their holding back.
Yeah. Now, how long did you wait in the process before you got the call for your daughter?
So from the time I was in the books,
Mhm.
it was a year and a half.
Okay.
I think that's what it was. Yeah, a year and a half.
Okay. And what was that year and a half like for you? Because, one of the major stressors or challenges that families face is the wait time. So what was that time frame like for you? What advice would you have for other families who may be struggling, specifically singles? Because, there's this idea of, I'm not getting picked because I'm a single. What would you say to
Yeah.
those folks?
And I had a lot of hesitation. I thought maybe I wouldn't be picked because I was single too. And it's interesting because I kept bringing that up with my social worker, and she was like, look, we've asked people, and the birth parents do not choose based on single versus not single. They're basing it on your profile. And a lot of people don't specifically say one way or the other. It's just based on what they like in your profile. And I took that to heart because there's no other way to take it. But I also kept asking, but how long do single people wait? And there was no direct answer. And I think that did give kind of a clue that because there's no answer, it meant some go quick and some don't. And I remember seeing on the website a single person that had been waiting for 4 years. And I was like, oh, I don't think I can do it for 4 years. And at the same time, I just decided I'm going to live my life the way I've been living it. I'm going to go on all the vacations I want to go on. And I would put myself on hold sometimes, not on hold sometimes. And I figured I'm single and I'm not going to get pregnant otherwise. So if this happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it wasn't meant to be. And that was kind of the attitude that I took going into it. And because I didn't want to get my hopes up too much. And I wanted to live my life and enjoy the way my life was, because you just never know. And I didn't want me to be clinging on to this thing that didn't exist.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that gives just the personal insight of like what got you through it. And I think that's really valuable. Now, you're a physician, correct?
Yeah.
So when you were filling out your profile key, where was your mindset in trying to navigate what to check off versus not, specifically with opiate exposure? Because that's a big topic for waiting families. And some are curious of like, maybe I'm open to it, but there's still some hesitation. What's your advice about that topic?
So interestingly, it was not the opioid exposure that was my hangup. I was totally okay with it. And I figured that would be the case no matter what. And I figured it's probably far and few between that it's not the case. And that was part of the reason I checked it, because I know my chances of adoption would be a lot lower if I didn't say I was okay with it. But the other thing is I have the ability to do some of the research, and I looked at what long-term effects would be, and would this cause issues later? Would it be somebody who would be dependent on me for life, because I am older and I don't want to have somebody dependent on me who then has to be dependent on somebody else. And so I pretty much checked the box for everything that I was okay with the exception of one of the psychiatric issues. And just because I wanted to be more open, and I figured if I were to birth a baby, I can't guarantee they wouldn't have any of those issues either, or any other issues. And so I figured, especially with advanced maternal age, the risk of any birth defects is going to be higher, and you can't guarantee anything. And so adoption is going to be the same way. You can't guarantee what the baby's going to be born with or not born with. And I just decided I was going to be as open as possible. And I mean, I have a sister with special needs. I knew what I was getting into, and she still lives with my parents. So I know that that's a possibility. And I went into it knowing that that is a possibility.
That's really powerful. And there's two things I want to highlight of what you just said. The first, in that you were prepared, as a single, of what could potentially happen, and the fact that you did your research on short-term, long-term side effects. Can you delve into that just a little bit more? Because I think that's the point that a lot of folks miss, especially with opiate withdrawal, in the fact that there's a lot of short-term challenges that happen.
Yeah.
But can you describe more about the long-term from both the physician side and the adoptive parent side?
So the interesting thing is I work in an emergency department and we see a lot of patients. And I realized a lot of patients that came in for psychiatric issues, which is one of the concerns people have with opioid use disorder, aren't the people coming in with NAS on their diagnosis list. It's not there. And I realized I'm really not seeing it in reality. Maybe it does exist and it's just not listed, but I'm finding that that's not one of the things that they had in their history was opioid withdrawal, and that they're coming in for opioid use disorder. It's not because they were born with it. And so I found that that's one of the things that in practice I'm not seeing. And so, yes, everybody has a risk of different addictions. And I think environment has a lot more to do with it than just genetics and exposure in the neonatal period. And I figure everybody's at risk of having a child with opioid use disorder because it's so common that it's not really going to change what they were born with. If they were born with it, they may or may not develop it later in life. There's no guarantee, but there is maybe a prediction. But I think if anybody looks at their own family, there's probably an addiction of some sort. And if there's an addiction of some sort, addiction runs in family one way or the other. So say there's an addiction to food or caffeine or tobacco or nicotine, the kid could be addicted to opioids just because it's a different pattern. It's still the addiction pattern in the brain. And so I figured there's addiction in my family. There's a high chance that I would have had a kid with an addiction issue too. And so that's one of the things that I thought about too. And yes, it can be genetic, but I think a lot of it is also environmental factors. And then as far as short term goes, yes, it was very stressful the first few months. She was in the NICU for a while for her withdrawals. And so I learned a lot more than I knew going into it by having her. And now I feel like I can now teach other people about it. But I feel like you can read everything you want, and it's just not the real experience. And yes, it's tough the first few months. And I just figured she's going through a lot, and I just need to be there to support her through it and do everything I can to help her. So we got, different services involved, like early interventions. That way we could work with her with PT and make sure she gets stretched because she was just so stiff. And that helps. And they expect her to be fully caught up very soon. And she's 16 months old now. And she's just very slightly delayed at this point. So she's caught up. And that's the thing that I think stresses a lot of people that in prior meetings that I had before the adoption. But they said most of their kids that have NAS through early intervention are out of early intervention by the time they finish at 3 years old.
I as I'm listening to you, Michelle, and a lot of this I have heard before just in my experiences, but there's something very calming about how you describe all this. And I think that should be noted. You are a physician, so I understand that to a certain extent, physicians do tend to be a little calmer than most folks. But I really appreciate you giving us like the reality, but it also not being the end of the world. And that's like the energy I'm getting from you.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't change it for anything.
In general, with the conversation of NAS and just kind of preparing families, and I appreciate you saying that it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows the first few months. It is rather challenging. But that versus the long term of you having your little girl, what insight or advice can you give to folks who are worried?
I think having your backup crew is helpful. I can't say I called that many people, but what I did was I created a list of sequential people I would call for help. So that way, if my brain was fried, if I was tired, I could just go to this list. And that was comforting enough. I didn't go to the list ever yet, but it was nice that I had it there. I had a live-in nanny for the first several months, just because it's hard to get daycare and all of that set up with emergency adoptions. But the live-in nanny helped with things, especially when she's like, look, you look tired, go take a nap. I've got her for a few hours. And so that was helpful. And, with her being bottle fed, it was a lot easier that I didn't have to worry about breastfeeding like most people would have to. And so it was a lot easier to just, okay, you've got her for a few hours, I'll go nap for a few hours. And that's where I think some of the help came in. Like I had called her when we were in the hotel waiting on interstate because I was like, look, I can't get any sleep. She's crying. And so she came and took her for a few hours so that way I could get sleep. And so it does help to have your village. Even early on, I think a lot of people are scared to tell family and friends what the actual diagnosis is and what the problem is. But I found it to be more helpful, and people were a lot more understanding when they knew what I was going through, and they felt bad for my child. And they were like, wow, she must be in a lot of pain. Let me see what I can do to make her more comfortable. And so it was kind of a different, I think some people try to really hide it because they think it's their child's story to tell and all of that, which I respect as well. But at the same time, I found it helped me to tell people.
I love that. I mean, we definitely support honesty and transparency. We support protecting the confidentiality of a child and an adoptee when they're ready to share. But again, your mindset, your perspective, your energy with all this is just really refreshing to hear. Talk to us about the support you receive from the agency. It sounds like you have a good relationship with your social worker.
Yeah, she's been great. Every time I have a question about anything, she's there. Even as simple as the birth mom reaching out and wanting something. She'll reach out and be like, look, this is not required by the paperwork, but this is what the birth mom wants. If you want to comply, that's fine. If you don't, then, we understand. And something like meeting up. What dates are you available? And there was something about, the birth mom said, hey, I want to meet up. And then I gave dates and then I didn't hear anything. And I was like, how many times can she ask this? Because I still have yet to meet her. And it's a very nerve-wracking thing because I don't know what she's like. I don't know her at all right now. And I was like, look, how many times can she ask and then not follow through? Because this is hard on me. And it will be hard on my child when she understands what's going on, if she knows that we're waiting. And so that's one of the things that I think we're also working on is, how many times can she ask to meet her, but then not follow through? Because I feel like we allowed for 3 visits a year, but I don't know how many times I can be requested. And my social worker is Stephanie, and she's been fantastic about supporting me through that. She was like, look, I know this is stressful. We're going to have a conversation with her. We're going to make sure that she is still willing to follow through even a few days before the meet date, just to make sure you're not driving somewhere without her showing up. And I really like that support. And Katie is also going to meet with us. The first meeting's supposed to be next weekend. So we'll see. Hopefully, I really do want to meet her. It's just very nerve-wracking at the same time. I think it's just the unknown, but at the same time, I want to meet her. I want my child to meet her. I want to ask questions to know more about her and her family. And so I really do want this to happen, but I also don't want to drive 3 hours each direction and not meet. Yeah. And so Stephanie's been so supportive through these questions and like, what can I expect? What can I not expect? What can happen? That it's been nice. Stephanie's almost become like a friend to be able to talk to about this stuff.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And again, Michelle, I appreciate you being so real about the feelings associated with open adoption, which is kind of what you're describing, navigating those communications and the future contact between birth family and adoptive family is not always easy. And I appreciate you being honest of like, sometimes it's really hard. We set these visits, she cancels on us. That can be a lot on you. That could potentially be hard on your child, especially as the child grows up. And that's the reality of navigating those relationships. I'm super excited to hear that you do have a visit set up. My fingers are crossed for you. But I think it's also worth noting that you seem to have a lot of respect for this birth mother and what she has gone through, continues to go through. We always say in open adoption, it's never exactly the same or one point in time. And she may be experiencing something where she's going through some anxiety and some emotions of like, okay, we have this visit set up, but maybe I'm not ready. And she kind of backs off of that. And that can be hard to navigate on her side, your side. The agency is in the middle to try to be the liaison to both. But I have full faith that this is going to go in the direction it's supposed to go in. And you seem to have a very open heart when it comes to navigating these relationships. So that's great. Any final thoughts of what you'd like people to know about your experience, something that you wish you had known when you first started?
I think the one thing that I wish I had known was some of the stuff I've talked about, that those first few months, with a newborn are definitely difficult. But when they have withdrawal, it's more difficult, and have your crew lined up. I think I was bashful in getting my crew lined up because I didn't know if adoption was going to happen. But as soon as it did happen, I had so many people texting me saying, call me if you need help. Call me if you need help. I have a 16-year-old daughter who would love to babysit if needed. And so it was amazing to be able to just quickly develop a list that I hadn't created. And it was created within the first month. And even my sister in California is like, I'm taking off work and leaving. And I was like, but you have no PTO left. We were just on vacation. And she's like, I don't care. My boss said I can leave. I'm leaving. And by the way, I was in Jamaica when she was born. But it was my last hurrah. Apparently, I just didn't know it. We were in Jamaica for 4th of July. And I got the call the day I returned to work.
Wow.
So it was, go on your vacations. That's my thing. Like, do what you want to do to live your life, because you can't guarantee when anything's going to happen. And I didn't want to put my life on hold just waiting for something to happen. And I think that's one of the biggest things is I think that's what got me through it was just I didn't think about it all the time. I went and did my own thing and I lived my own life and went on vacation and went places that are going to be very difficult to do for the next several years. And I think that was probably the smartest thing I did. I'm getting the itch to vacation again now. But it's one of those, I'm really glad I did what I did before I got her.
Well, Michelle, again, we appreciate you coming on this platform and sharing your story. I know that these conversations will be very valuable for folks who are still in that waiting process or even just considering adoption. We appreciate you. We wish you lots of happiness for you and your daughter in the future. And we're just grateful for you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Continue to tune in to future episodes here at Adoptions from the Heart TV. Thanks so much.